Matthew, you do a trade advice column from Thursday's Love Hate. The Matthew Berry definitive guide to trading, of course. So we each came up with one sell target, one buy target. And Matthew, we will start with you. Who's a top target that you'd be looking to sell right now? And really kind of for those that haven't read it yet and should on NBCSports.com, what goes into your trade advice throughout this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a lot of theory is what it is the particular column, is because I think it's so many times I've been in so many leagues over the years, and so many times you just get the email from whatever, whether you play on ESPN or Yahoo or Sleep or wherever you play NFL. You get the email and you're just like, I'm turning that down, and you have no idea what the thought process is. And so there you see it there on your screen. Some of what I would do, and I go into detail on all this in the Love Hate article, which is free on rotoworld.com, NBCSports.com, of course, the company man. But figure out what you need, what they have. You do a deep dive on everyone's team. Like, where's the best trade partner? Start marketing your players. Like, let people know, hey, I'm open to trade, right? And then, again, number 4 is so important, because I have to tell you, so many times you just get these emails out of the blue, like, hey, text somebody. Hey, can we get on the phone? Hey, want to talk trade? Because when you're talking with somebody, you can hear what they react to and what they don't. A text or an email is an imperfect form of communication. Negotiating is something that needs to be done in person, or at least by hearing it, right? And then make sure you understand all angles of a trade. So many people look at the upside, but you have to also consider the downside. What happens if this trade goes south? What happens if it doesn't work out? How screwed are you? And so don't be afraid to walk away. Don't gloat after you've won a trade. And by the way, for the love of all that is holy and good in this world, don't veto. Veto is the coward's way out. Everyone should be allowed to coach their team, no matter they should be allowed to coach their team, even if it's poorly, even if you don't agree with it. You think some trades are ripoff. Okay, it doesn't matter. Not your team. Don't veto. Veto is the coward's way out. So anyway, you can read more of my reasoning there, but it just gives a lot of theory on how to, it's basically kind of the art of negotiation within fantasy football is what that article is. And so we're going to dive into some players here, but I highly encourage you to read the article. I do a version of it every year, just sort of the art of negotiation in fantasy football.
All right, Matthew, so we'll start with you. Give us a sell candidate that you're looking at right now.
I mean, I think Adam Thielen, I think the argument for Adam Thielen is, of course, that he is the Carolina Panthers offense. He's been really good so far this year. He's been very, very productive. Having said that, of course, he had that 31.5-point game with Andy Dalton there in week 3. But here's the concern with Andy Dalton. First off, there's been rumors that Carolina is looking to trade for a number 1 wide receiver. So they want to add to that wide receiver room. His target share has been decreasing a little bit, especially when you think about, he's got this massive target share, but DJ Shark was banged up, and then Jonathan Mingo as well. They both already missed a game so far this season. He's 33 years old. Can he play at this high level of production throughout the entire season? His best game of the year was that Andy Dalton game, and so I think his ceiling with Bryce Young is probably lower. And so Thielen is somebody that, I think you could argue is a legit wide receiver 2 in fantasy right now. And I would sell him for that, or, I would put a top 25 wide receiver price tag on him. And I think you could probably get that.
Yeah, and Jay, I think another thing you have to be looking at with Thielen right now is that this offense doesn't scare you. You just have to kind of shade things towards him. I know it's crazy to say in the year 2023, but he's the guy that when you're game planning each week, all right, let's stop Adam Thielen and see where Bryce ultimately goes elsewhere.
Yeah, and so he's doing it through volume at the moment, and he really is the only guy in that offense. I think Jonathan Mingo will get more of a role as the season progresses, as he comes back from his concussion. But Connor, I think that Adam Thielen, his upside the rest of the way is tied to Bryce Young just getting better. Have you seen any signs from Bryce Young that, he can improve the rest of the season?
He's going through it. Now, there's things in his hands, right? Number one, he's not the most physical player, so unlike an Anthony Richardson, when things break down, Anthony Richardson just has physical talent. He can run, he can extend, he can throw the ball a mile. With Bryce, everything, this goes back to a conversation we had earlier, timing and rhythm. That's what he maximized at Alabama, and that's what he will maximize in the NFL. That day will come, but the line's not good enough. Yep. The receivers aren't good enough. They don't have a run game that threatens, so you could sell out against the run, and they're not getting that going. And Bryce is just not seeing the field. The game's a little fast for him right now, so I think that time is coming. I don't think that time is coming in the next month, and that matters too much in fantasy.
Yep, agreed.
So who are you looking at, Jay?
A little sacrilegious, but I'm looking to sell Derrick Henry, which is a shame because I love King Henry.
Maybe the Titans will too.
Yes, well, that's another interesting wrinkle here. And look, I think it's a good time to sell on Henry because he just had his best game of the season, going 22 for 122 and a touchdown. But his next 2 weeks are against the Colts, against the Ravens, and I just worry about this Tennessee offensive line and the fact that 2 weeks ago he went 11 carries for 20 yards. And my concern with Henry is twofold. One, he's the biggest injury risk in the sport, just because he gets more carries than everyone and there's such attrition at the running back position. And then secondly, he's just not getting the work in the receiving game. He broke a long one against the Saints in week 1, but the past 2 weeks he has 1 target. And also Tajay Spears is looming there, cutting into his snap share a little bit. I just think there are some things swirling around Tennessee and Henry where I think that coming off his best game of the season, it might be time to sell.
I don't think you're crazy at all. When you look at this offense and maybe what the future of this offense is, at what point, here's the big one for me, Jay. At what point, and there has to be this point, did they give Will Levis or Malik Willis a look? And we're excited about those guys. I don't know how excited we are about them in fantasy this year, where they might be anchoring down a lot of their counterparts. Goes back to what we just said. If you don't trust the young quarterback, well, the defense is going to sell out against the run game. That affects Derrick Henry. So it could depend how long Ryan Tannehill's the starter. Matthew, when you look at Derrick Henry, who's been a fantasy force for how many years now, do you align with Jay's thought here?
Yeah, I really do. It's one of the reasons why I've said Tajay Spears is one of my most rostered bench players. I just have him stashed in a number of leagues, and I highly recommend a lot of other people do that as well. I think there's concern with injury, concern that this team goes south and they trade him. I'm nervous about Derrick Henry, who is very game script dependent. They don't use him enough in the passing game, even though he sort of has that skill set. But I don't think the Titans are very good this year. And so I think there's going to be a lot more games like the first couple games of the year and not as many as they were last week as well. So, yeah, I'm on board with Jay.
I'm sticking with the running back theme here. And, Jay, I'm looking at this one kind of pains me because I like the player. Matthew really sold us on his value all summer, and he was right. James Conner, he's been a top 20 running back in fantasy, RB19 in points per game. But here's where it's starting to trend the other way. Under 65% of the snaps the past 2 weeks after being above 70% weeks 1 to 2. He's losing some passing game work in this offense, an offense that now beginning to trust in them to throw with Josh Dobbs. And I think they're trusting him to throw. We saw Michael Wilson unlocked the last 2 weeks. They already have Hollywood Brown. They target Zach Ertz. I think an offense that you looked at and go, man, they could just turn around and hand the ball to James Conner 20 times and throw to him 6 to 8 times. With the emergence of Michael Wilson and this actually being a competent offense, I think that hurts James Conner. And on top of all of that, Jay, he's missed multiple games every season of his career.
Yep, that's a concern. And look, I think that you have to adjust some of your priors 4 weeks in, but at the same time, this was a team that was like plus 220 to have the worst record in football, and people were talking about this as, a farce of a team. And look, they've vastly outperformed that. They've been a lot better than expected, but they're probably going to be underdogs in every single game they play this year. And so just you're up against it with game script every single game with James Conner.
And now they could actually trust their quarterback to play to that game script and throw. So, Matthew, not only your thoughts on James Conner, and you're not giving away James Conner. You need something significant in return, but definitely as a feeler out there. And also, how about a buy candidate from you on a more happier note?
Yeah, I'm not as fully worried about James Conner as you are. Again, one of the arguments about him in the preseason was that even if the Cardinals were losing, he's a good pass catcher, and they don't have a lot else in that backfield, and they still don't, right? They've Corey Clement and, Keontae Ingram, who's been hurt. They've been using Rondell Moore some, which is kind of interesting. But I just feel like I'm not ready to sell high on James Conner just because there are so few bell cow running backs. I don't mind trading him. I wouldn't say he's untouchable, but I'm not actively looking to shop him maybe the way you are, Connor. But I certainly understand all of your point of view. And yes, the declining numbers in terms of snaps and touches is a little bit eyebrow raising, and a touch concerning. As for somebody I want to buy low on, I think the perception isn't there yet. But trust me, whoever has Jalen Waddle in your league is well aware that he hasn't been the guy you expected to draft. He is, for the season, he is outside the top 40 on a points per game basis. Obviously, he missed the one game as well. He missed the 70-point game. But he hasn't been what you drafted him to be. And the Dolphins offense has just been ridiculous. They're running more, obviously, having the tremendous success they're having with Mostert and specifically Devon Achane. Tyreek Hill has gotten his. But Jalen Waddle, you didn't draft him to be wide receiver 44, which is what I believe he is on a points per game basis at the moment. So I'm a believer in Waddle, right? He's averaging over 13 yards per target this season, which is 5th best among qualified wide receivers. He leads all qualified wide receivers in fantasy points per target since the start of last season. I just feel like he is too good to not get more work in a very explosive offense. I'm not worried about Chase Claypool, though it is worth noting that the Dolphins did, as you see it there on your screen, the Dolphins did agree to terms on a trade with Chicago for Claypool. They also get a 7th-round pick in exchange for a 6th-round pick, pending a physical. So they give up a 6th, and they get Claypool and a 7th back. That's how desperate Chicago was to get rid of Chase Claypool. I can't imagine. Listen, for all the concerns you might have about Jalen Waddle, Chase Claypool beating him out for targets ain't high on my list. So anyway, I'm a believer in this offense, and I'm a believer in his talent, and ultimately it's a slow start for Jalen Waddle, but I think he's a borderline top 10 wide receiver, and I think you can get him for less than that. He's not going to come cheap, but if you could get him for a top 20 price, I would do that in a heartbeat. You know what I mean?
Jay, what's more motivation than being traded for a swap of a 7th and 6th round pick that's 2 years away?
Look, I'm not sure it matters for Chase Claypool. I'm not expecting Claypool to do a ton in Miami, though. If he's going to succeed anywhere, it's going to be in Mike McDaniel's offense with those weapons around him. But I agree with Matthew. Jalen Waddle, not concerned about Claypool's emergence in Miami, taking away from Jalen Waddle. And the talent is just too significant. He's been banged up. He was banged up in the preseason. He's missed time. He'll get better as the season goes on. And the other thing, Connor, is that Tirico Hill got banged up at the end of last season, and I don't think they want him to be getting 13 targets a game. They'll want to spread the wealth, and Jalen Waddle will be the big beneficiary of that.
I'm with you all the way. They don't want to run out of gas for the playoffs, and that's another reason I wasn't bold enough to do this, but I look at Raheem Mostert and think, while Mostert's awesome value, he's been incredible this year. I'm not bold enough to call him a sell candidate, but the reality is, we've already seen it with Devon Achane. There's going to be a time where Jeff Wilson is a thing in this backfield. So from Miami, and that just further hints to your point, Jay, there's going to be a time where it's not Tyreek, it's Waddle weeks, right? So they have to spread the ball around. They have to keep these guys fresh if they want to be this high-flying, greatest show on turf style offense. And that definitely starts with Waddle being who he's been. All right, Jay, how about a buy candidate from you?
Yeah, so for me, it's Dameon Pierce, who's only averaging 2.8 yards per carry on the ground. He's only gotten into the end zone once, but he got 24 carries last week. There's only a handful of running backs in the league who even have the potential to get that kind of workload in a given week. He's getting a little bit of work in the receiving game. He's got 8 receptions on the season so far. I just believe in the talent as well. You look at last year, what he did in terms of broken tackle rate, in terms of yards after contact. He just runs angry. He's an excellent runner, elite by PFF grade. And I just think as well that this Texans team, 1, they're more competent than expected. 2, they've got the 3rd easiest remaining schedule in the league, so he's going to be in position to get good game script. And then 3, their offensive line is getting healthier. They've got Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard coming back. So I think there's just a lot aligning behind Dameon Pierce breaking out. He's not going to average 2.8 yards per carry the rest of the way.
Yeah, and Matthew, I'll throw this to you. When you look at the emergence already of C.J. Stroud in a surprisingly very effective pass offense. They have 3 viable receivers. Bobby Slowick's done a great job calling quick game here. You feel like at some point the pendulum starts to swing back to that can allow the run game with Dameon Pierce to get going.
1,000%. Obviously, they're going to have to respect the pass now. And look, Dameon Pierce was one of my big guys in the preseason and just preseason love, and I was all in, and I had him much higher in my rankings than consensus. So it's been a little bit of a slow start for me because I have a lot of Pierce. I go by my rankings when I draft, so I have a lot of Pierce, including in our show league. So obviously, I'm loving what Jay is saying, and I completely believe it. It's a better offense than it advertised. He's a good player. Their offensive line is getting healthier. They're going to be in positive or at least neutral game script in a lot more games this year than I think people expect. You saw in the highlights that we just showed, he caught a couple of passes. They're starting to involve him more in the passing game. So, yeah, all in on trying to acquire Dameon Pierce because he's going to the moon.
I'll close this out with my buy target. Jay, I'm going with Tyler Lockett here. And when you look at Lockett, it's a slow start to the year. He's gone under 10 points in 3 of his 4 games. There hasn't been a ton working for him. Here's the good, though, and the reason to buy in. Still has a 22% target share. That's a team high. And an offense that has DK Metcalf, it's been a slow start for Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think the real Geno will really crank it up in these next 2 months as well. And then another thing, Lockett's one of the most consistent wide receivers in all of fantasy. He's finished in the top 16 the last 4 seasons. You can always rely on Tyler Lockett. There might be some really big games. There might be some disappointing games. It's not always steady at a performance week in and week out. But if somebody is kind of looking at it and kind of disappointed with his first 4 games of the season, I think he's going to be fine.
Yeah, and I think the concern for Lockett coming into the season is JSN might really eat in. It hasn't really happened for JSN yet. And Lockett, I mean, just like clockwork, every year, 80 receptions, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's just one of the, I mean, he's kind of boring in a way, but
totally
he shouldn't be boring with those kind of stats. He's just rock solid, dependable wide receiver too.
Yeah, Matthew, how do you project Lockett through the rest of the way? By the way, he has your Commanders at some point on the schedule as well, so that there could be some positive trending upward for him there.
I project 275 yards and 4 touchdowns for Tyler Lockett against my Commanders. The expectation there is that they'll put Emmanuel Forbes on him to just get burned left and right and right and right and right and right.
Sorry.
That's what they do. They finally benched him last night, but who knows? Yeah, I mean, listen, Lockett is one of the most explosive guys. I think the stat I used on Lockett in the preseason was that I think there's only one wide receiver, literally one wide receiver in the NFL that has had at least 8 receiving touchdowns each of the last 5 seasons. And it's Tyler Lockett. Like, you'd have been like, it's probably like Devontae Adams maybe. Like, you go through the list of, like, Cooper Kupp's been in the league for a long, who's, an elite wide receiver has been in the league for a long time. And no, the answer is Tyler Lockett. He's clearly got a connection with Geno Smith as well. Geno's playing like he did last year. So big believer in Tyler Lockett, who just, continually, every year, it doesn't matter where he gets drafted, he always outperforms ADP.
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Roto-World fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.